Chair, we're now live.
Thank you and good evening everyone. A warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Resident Services Select Committee. My name is Councillor Wayne Bridges and I'm chairman of this meeting. Key role of this committee is to monitor performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. Please note that members of the committee will be using tablets, laptops to view the agenda today. Some quick housekeeping rules. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one sounds, please follow the officers to the fire exits, out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch off any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts. We also have resident feedback forms available in the room and underneath the broadcast. We move on now to apologies for absence, please.
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting? Are there any? Actually, no indications. Item 3, to receive the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 8. Can we agree those? Thank you. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in Part 1. There are no Part 2 items to be considered. We move on to Item 5, which is the fund fares, regulations and hiring arrangements, pages 9 to 12. And welcome to Stephanie this evening. As per the previous process for our meetings, we will not be taking a presentation. We will be going direct to questions. So I'll open up to questions from members, please. Councillor Gohill.
Hi, good evening. My question is just about the amount of charges we give to these fun fair companies who put fun fairs up on our parks, etc. I was just wondering, compared to other boroughs, how, in terms of like revenue that we generate, are we in line with other boroughs? Are we behind? Are we ahead? Is the fee and structure something that needs to be looked at? If you could just shed a bit more light on that, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so the actual charges for the events to take place on council land is managed by Green Spaces. So they would be responsible for setting the fees and charges for each space, and we do have probably a disproportionate amount of green space in our borough comparatively with other kind of London areas close by to us. But that's certainly something I can feed back to Green Spaces as to whether that information is available, certainly for benchmarking for other boroughs, just to have some sort of comparison.
So just to clarify rather than another question, if that's all right. So we have no idea if we charge more or less than or what the going rate is for this sort of thing. Is that correct?
So I don't, because that's not under my remit, but I can take the question back to Green Spaces and just ask them to clarify for you.
Okay. Yeah, that's useful. Thank you.
Councillor Gohill, do you have a follow-up? No. Any other members? Councillor Davis.
Thank you. So we get a lot of fun fairs. In my ward, I've got one yearly. And my first question is how do we manage the noise from the fun fair? Because I tend to get, when there's one at Park Lane, I tend to get a lot of complaints from residents about the noise, about the out-of-hours noise. I know a lot of the fairs are now containing the customers in the fair, but as they're leaving, etc., and the noise from the fair. How do we control that?
The short answer is we don't. It is an offence to cause a nuisance to statutory levels where residents are unable to enjoy peacefully their own houses. We would respond to service requests in that instance. So if somebody felt that the nuisance was so unbearable or just so unreasonable, they can log a service request with us. They can contact our out-of-hours service. We do operate an out-of-hours service on 4 nights per week, or they can log a daytime service request whenever the noise is occurring. That will get logged with us, and we will respond to that. And if it, we may send an officer down there to check the timings, just to check, if it is so unreasonable. But there is a difference between sort of noise happening in the, while people are out and about, and then the noise that is affecting and impacting somebody in their own home. So we would assess all of those factors before deciding the best course of action.
Councillor Davis?
Yeah. So when we allow these companies to to book the park, do we not stipulate any terms and conditions, for example, that they have to keep their music at a certain noise level, any lighting they have has to be directional? Do we not put them in place?
So there are sort of hiring lease arrangement terms and conditions that Green Spaces would attach to any hire agreement. It is an offence to create a nuisance, and that nuisance can be via noise, can be via light, can be dust, can be anything that is a nuisance. So if people are experiencing a nuisance, then they can call us. So we have an environmental protection service that operates in out of hours. Their role is to respond to nuisances. So we wouldn't provide a term or a condition for something that already exists in statute.
Okay.
Yeah.
So reactive rather than...
It's reactive. I mean, you would want the operator to operate responsibly and have that consideration for local residents. It's similarly to building noise. These things happen periodically, and where the noise is unreasonable, then we will respond to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Core?
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on what Councillor Davis said, so are there no site visits to ensure compliance then? Because unless someone complains, you won't be visiting to check for compliance of anything, or can you just drop by and have a look?
We wouldn't respond, we wouldn't proactively visit unless there was a complaint. As you'll see in the paper, there isn't any one permitting scheme that operates for this type of activity, but there's a lot of kind of regulations that does apply. We wouldn't proactively go and look at those. We would only respond if there was a complaint or cause for us to investigate something.
Councillor Core?
Thank you. And also, in terms of the contractors, am I correct to understand that the contractors that go in at these places are the same contractors each year to the particular sites, or are there any changes in contractors?
They are typically the same funfair operators that will go back to the same sites. So yes, you will see the usual kind of operators in the same location each year. But that's not to say that another operator could come in at any point or go to a completely new location that hadn't been considered previously. Yeah.
Councillor Gardner?
My problem is with the huge hoardings that they put up. There's quite a lot. I mean, most of them are relating where I live and the ward that I represent, the same as Kamal, which is further up, is the Barrow Hall Park. Those were up for a considerable time before Funfair Circus, and they were left there for a considerable time afterwards. And I rang up and said, why aren't they taking them down? And was told they don't have to.
Are you talking about the advertising?
Yeah, the huge great boards that are stuck on the railings for zebra crossings and things like that. And I was told, one of my MEs, that they don't have to remove them. I thought, well, we have to send a team out to remove them.
They would. And if they failed to, then we would. If they should remove them. So as contained in the report, there is this exemption for travelling fairs, whereby they have to remove the signage 14 days. I think it's
14
days after the event. If that doesn't happen, we are able to issue them an FPN. So our enforcement, and again, we would react to that unless we happen to spot one while we were out and about. So we would issue an FPN to the operator. But yeah, apologies if you've been given them wrong information. That should have been picked up. Depending on the location. If it's private land, it's a little more tricky, but certainly on public land, on parkland, any of our kind of public realm infrastructure, lampposts, railings, etc., we would have that responsibility to go and remove and enforce if they fail to do so.
Well, it was outside my front door, basically, and it wasn't removed by them. It was removed by a crew from the borough.
Okay.
Also, the other thing that worries me, if we have the same contractors coming in to do the same fairgrounds in the same areas, if you've had complaints, because we got complaints about fireworks and noise from Barrow Hall. Now, Barrow Hall is considerably long way from where I live, but they went on very, very late, and it's a small hours in the morning. If complaints go in about specific fairgrounds, when they come back the following year, does somebody say to them, well, by the way, can you not do this, this and this, because that's the complaints we had?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, that should be part of the Green Spaces kind of assessment of the hire arrangements on each year, you know, a review of what's taken place previously, and then setting up the hire agreement for the, you know, for the forthcoming year. But yeah, that's something I can take back and ask for clarification on.
Can you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just go on the back of Councillor Gardner's point about the hoardings and the posters, because this is something I have a lot of concern about as well. I know the rules state 14 days. I mean, I've raised them previously through members' inquiries, and I wouldn't even say weeks. It's probably months I've had before where they've been up and about. And I'm just curious about the FPNs. There was 3 issued. How much are these FPNs that we issue to them? I mean, if they're hundreds of pounds for a big business, it would be peanuts to them, really, and they would probably just be happy to take the fine and just leave them up. Do you feel the fines are robust enough, and is there more room to increase that fine should we feel it's necessary to do so?
Yeah, thank you. The fines are set at a fairly, what I would consider to be moderate level, so they're between £50 and £100. I'm not exactly sure of the level for these particular fines, but they will be set at statutory level, so there's very little that we can do to actually influence the upper limit of those.
Is that per poster or per area? How's that calculated?
It could be technically it could be per poster. So we would when we're enforcing, we would take a view. If there's a clump of them in one smaller area, we may consider that one is appropriate. However, if they are spread out over a wider area, we may consider that more than one is appropriate. So it will depend on the amount, the locations, you know, and we would take into account previous conduct as well as to what action we take, whether it's an FPN or we can prosecute in the most extreme circumstances.
Thank you. And I suppose my follow-up really was those incidents that I did report previously. The concerning thing was these were actually on our land, these fun fairs. So although we may not have much wiggle room with the FPNs, we should perhaps be looking at who we're doing business with in the future at those sites and saying, actually, are you the best people to be doing business with, given your previous behaviour? Just an observation on my part. Anyone else? Councillor Gohill?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just off the back of what Councillor Bridges said, and Councillor Gardner and Councillor Core, to be fair, just around the FPNs, you know, we've heard 3 cases tonight alone about boards being left up and things like that. And one of the answers you gave to Councillor Core just now is that you don't do any site visits when the fun fairs go up. So how are you adequately assessing the need for whether we need to issue FPNs or not if no one's actually going there, or the nearby areas? I suppose that's one question. I'll ask another in a second.
So our current operating model is just based on people reporting things to us, members, residents. So they would report sighting of a board that's been left up, you know, for however long. We would then respond to that via an investigation. We would send an officer out there and we'd issue a ticket. Sometimes they are spotted by officers out and about doing other things, and they will get dealt with in that way. But yeah, we don't proactively go looking for this type of job.
I feared that was the answer. That's not great, is it? That's not great to our residents at all. If we're not looking out for, we as council officers or council employees aren't looking out for things, but waiting for residents to come and complain to us, it doesn't give a good look to residents. But so I've got a suggestion, and I know this item's just for noting, Chair, but if with your permission, if I could give a suggestion that maybe your team can go away and look at, and that's whether we introduce a bond concept to fun fair companies who might want to put their fun fairs up in Hillingdon, where they put a small amount in or a amount in that's up to your team to decipher. Put a bond in, and when they take down their posters, and when we're sure they're not damaging council land or our grass verges or etc., then they can get their money back from us. it protects us, it protects them, it stops our green waste teams having to go out and take down their boards at no expense, and it just seems like a good idea. Is that something that you can maybe take on board and hopefully we can see where that goes?
Yeah, that's a really great idea, and I would certainly be happy to feed that back to Green Spaces. Just to sort of address the current enforcement operating model, we do have a relatively small team for the amount of service requests that we do get in, and we're kind of dealing with these jobs in the context of possibly higher priority, higher danger matters. We have high volumes of waste accumulations, pest infestations, abandoned vehicles, all the other things. So on any given week, we will have to prioritise things as to the most risk. So that, just to give you a little bit of context as to sort of what the team are operating with, and we would love to kind of switch to a more proactive operating model in the future, and that may be possible at one point, but for the moment the way we are set up is to react to those service requests.
Did I give you a follow-up? I'll come back to you. There's other people wanting to ask questions. Apologies. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad you clarified for the Chair about the fees on the FPNs, because that was something that was I was very curious about myself. I want to get some clarification on the food hygiene section. So it says that caterers should be registered with a home authority, and the home authority has the responsibility. So this applies to both the circus and the fun fair. So how would they implement that if the circus is travelling all around the country and rarely goes back to its home authority?
So any business or any operator will have registrations and certain licences or whatever registered at an address. That is their business home authority. So with mobile caterers, it's unlike your high street restaurant where you're fixed. Mobile caterers, they do travel all over the place, but they will have to register with their home authority. If they don't have one, they can choose one. They should choose one. But from our experience, most responsible operators will register at the authority location where their business is based. And normally they will, for fairground operators, circus operators, they will have a base somewhere in the country that they use for, their equipment, storage of vehicles, to sort of change over. So they will have a home authority.
Councillor Barley?
I'm also just saying they haven't got home authorities. It was more to do with the process of how where it says here that the home authority has a responsibility to check the hygiene on regular intervals.
Oh, I see.
So how are they doing that if they're rarely at the home
location?
I've
misunderstood you.
So that's what I was getting at, sorry.
So the process of any new food business registration, you can register your business, and then normally within 3 months a local authority will contact you to do the inspection. Not contact you necessarily, but will carry out the inspection. For mobile caterers, and often home caterers, what our inspectors do is actually we have to pre-arrange that appointment. We wouldn't normally, we would just walk into any restaurant and do it unannounced, because that often gets the best, honest picture. But for mobile caterers and home caterers, we quite often would have to make a prior appointment, let them know we're coming. So for any mobile caterers, you would have to have the unit present to actually inspect it. So I guess they would arrange a mutually convenient time with their home authority in order to carry that out.
Councillor Davis?
Thank you, Chairman. Where shall I start? This one may be Green Spaces as well, but I've noticed when the fairground leave, there's the damage that is caused to the parks, to the green space, etc., especially like on Park Lane, which I will use, or Park Green Road. The charge that I've seen is, I think revenue we brought in was 25,000 from the fairs. How much of that goes back to repairing the green space? Because there's been large skips left there for periods of time, Arctic lorry tracks across the grass, because let's be honest, we're in England, the weather's not great, so the grass is damaged or dead because they're putting boards out to allow people to walk on. How much of that money do we actually bank?
That's something I do not know, but I would be happy to take that back to Green Spaces for you and get them to answer that for you.
Your follow-up, Councillor?
Yeah. Given that we're pretty much tied with fun fairs because they're largely outside of licence regulations, do you think the council should put a local policy in place for fun fairs to strengthen the stuff that we can't control? Or is there something that we can do like that? So a local policy when it comes to hiring of our green spaces or something like that. Is that something that your team has looked at, or...?
Yeah, it is definitely something that the council has power to do in implementing a more robust policy than the current one in place, and it's something that I had discussed with the Director of Environment prior to this meeting in getting some information, and that is one of the kind of development areas that they wanted to carry out in the green spaces area, to actually develop something that's more robust, more structured in terms of hiring those spaces out for different events. So yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Kaur?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of health and safety, I was wondering if you've had any health and safety concerns from any of the contractors. If there were, what kinds, and if any, then how were they dealt with? And when they came back again, how was the compliance checked?
Thank you for that. This is one of the kind of strange things about health and safety legislation, is that responsibility for the enforcement of it is actually split. Sometimes it's the local authority and sometimes it's the health and safety executive. Fun fairs are actually enforced by the health and safety executive, so the local authority doesn't have an enforcement role. But with most health and safety cases, there isn't a proactive element to it necessarily. It's a reactive method of enforcement. So both all local authorities and the HA could be an injury or worse. And upon receipt of that information, the health and safety executive would make an assessment and consider whether to go and visit. We do, we see it in the news every now and then. There are kind of injuries and even deaths in some of these, fun fairs, pleasure parks all around the country. So the health and safety executive would investigate those, and then they would dig into all of the equipment, working practices, risk assessments, and look at all of that side of things. So I don't have any specific data because it's not ours. It would go into the health and safety executive.
So we don't know if there were any incidents of health and safety concerns at any of these operators?
They wouldn't have come into us because we are not the enforcing authority. There may be some that exist with the health and safety executive, but we wouldn't know about those.
So would you be asking them when they come in the following year is there a sign-up form where they confirm that nothing of the sort happened previously, so they are safe to operate the next year as well?
That's certainly something that I could feed back for the inclusion in the kind of shaping of a future policy. Yeah.
Councillor Smallwood?
Thank you, Chair. And if I may, an observation and then a question. The observation would be Stephanie has done an excellent job this evening in answering questions fairly and concisely, and it's an example to other officers across the council on the way to do it, if I'm being honest with you. Although I think it would have been useful to have somebody from Green Spaces here, because I think there's a real double element here that Stephanie has answered the bit that she is quite rightly responsible for, and it is not her job to do it. So I just wonder in future, if we have this, we could look at maybe having cross-cutting, where this does cross-cut across departments. My question is in around persistent rule breakers or concerns around health and safety. Now, I recognise the council doesn't have authority over health and safety, but it does over things like the licence being followed correctly, the health and safety elements, some of the health and safety elements, some of the nuisance, some of the advertising being up for too long or too short. Obviously, we have to allow them to come and be on our land. If somebody is a persistent offender, have we looked at refusing them future usage of the site? Because I'm sure if somebody was causing a lot of nuisance to residents or breaking the rules, that would be a potential way of encouraging others not to break the rules if they knew that some had been stopped coming again.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for your kind compliments as well. When Green Spaces do get an application or do consider repeat operators to come back onto their land. We do provide them with any complaint data, and that would then feed into their decision, albeit sort of recognise that the policy could be more robust. When I did some preparation for this report, I did check back through a couple of years worth of our records, and apart from a couple of SPNs and I think an isolated noise complaint, we didn't have much that actually related to fun fairs. So I think my message, to yourselves and to pass on to the residents, if they have an issue, regardless of whether they think we can do anything about it or not at the time, get it reported. When things are reported to us, it does build a data picture for us to consider for shaping future work. And also, it's something that we can discuss with Green Spaces if we've had particular issues or a particular high number of reports for a fun fair in 1 year. We can have that conversation with Green Spaces and say, look, this one really caused us some problems last year. It may also be that, other agencies, such as the police, have also had issues with peripheral issues linked with the fun fair as well, as that can sometimes happen. Then we can kind of take that all into account. So yeah, that would be the message. Get it reported, get the data into us so that we have that full picture of those instances.
Follow up.
Interested in how we work proactively with the people, the sort of managers or the owners of these fun fairs when they come and visit. I'm guessing they're going around the country and they're trying to run a business, so actually it is in their interest for people to behave in a reasonable manner, for them to stick to various regulations and rules. But there is this often, unfortunately, we don't have any fun fairs in my ward, but there is often a stereotype that comes that some people seem to attach to some of the people that are running these, which I think is a little bit unfair, given these people are clearly running an operation that's obviously successful, otherwise it wouldn't be coming back time and time again. How do we work proactively with them to ensure, as proactive partners, to ensure that the operation that they are trying to deliver is a success?
I think there's an awful lot we can do in providing advice, guidance and education to these operators. There's an awful lot of guidance out there, and there are things like the amusement device inspection regime, or ADIPS, which actually it's like an MOT for your fairground equipment, and they have to have these pieces of equipment and machines certified at regular intervals. There's an awful lot of information on the Showman's Guild. There's a lot of information on the HSC website in terms of running safe, what we deem unregulated events. So there's an awful lot of advice and guidance out there, and I think this links in with the potential policy piece that has been spoken about before, that the council has a more robust policy about how it will look to facilitate these types of events in the borough, but also alongside that is a suite of information that's available to these operators, because I think a lot of the fairground operators are, what we would class as the professional tourers. They go around the whole country. They're a very professional kind of outfit. They know what they're doing, and they come in and they do their open their fun fair and then they leave. But we also get a lot of approaches from other groups, community organisations, for example, that do need that advice and guidance on how to write a risk assessment or how to marshal an event. So there's an awful lot that we can do as a borough to make sure that we are providing as much assistance as possible to those operators and other event organisers who may want to use our spaces.
Councillor Gohill.
Thank you. First, can I just echo what Councillor Smallwood said? Really difficult question to getting, and I understand it's not everything's in your department, so really well done on that, and just it's been really informative. In terms of what we said last time around, just a quick recap on the proactiveness aspect of it. The reason I asked is because we went on a site visit with the noise team a little while ago, but while we were out with the noise team in the evening, they were also checking on licences from restaurants. That's when me and Councillor Farley went, and maybe I thought this was something checking out for signs is something that we can ask maybe our waste teams to do while they're driving around, because a lot of these bins, a lot of the things that they're picking up, fly tipping, whatever, they're near parks anyway. It's just worth like maybe adding a can we keep an eye out for this. I do have a question, just a little question as well, and it was just off the back of what Councillor Call said about health and safety. I know you said you don't get the information for health and safety, but what about like food safety? Does it extend to that as well? You know, everyone needs like a food safety certificate. Are they being inspected while they're there, or is it like strictly no hot food allowed or something? I'm sure there's some sort of regulation. I'd just be interested to know a bit more.
Thank you. Yeah, so the food inspectors wouldn't go and inspect the event while it was there. We do make sort of special exceptions for things like the Christmas market, where we will send an officer out. That is slightly different because it's a licensed event. We deal with that slightly differently. But they wouldn't go out and proactively inspect a food establishment on one of these, present at one of these events. However, they would respond to claims or reports of any unsafe or unhygienic catering food practices. They would respond to any claims of food poisoning. So there are things that they would react to, but they have their kind of food inspection planned programme for food businesses based in this borough. So they will be churning through that throughout the year, but they will also react to food poisoning cases, and also reports of unsafe, unhygienic practices. Yeah.
Thank you. So what happens in the case of it's the last day of the fun fair? People go along, they eat some food. Fun fair packs up that evening, gone the next morning, and people start to feel sick and they're complaining. What happens in that kind of circumstance? They're already gone. Just curious as to know what happens there, and if that's chased up the following year as well, or if there are people who have become sick as a result of eating food at the fun fair, is that also chased up?
Yeah, so if we received that report because they had an event here and then they were gone by the time we could do anything about it, we would refer that to their home authority for follow-up. So it goes somewhere, but it would go back to their home authority for follow-up, and then their home authority may decide to bring their inspection forward if it wasn't due for a long amount of time, or they may choose to deal with it differently, carry out another investigation. It's very, very difficult to prove instances of food poisoning without sort of hard samples of the food. So it can be a very difficult thing to actually prove. But yes, complaint data it does add to the overall picture of a business. So if we receive that here, we would refer that to the home authority.
Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. That's actually a question. I wasn't actually asked if it was the last day. Just to be clear on that point, as per the pack, it does say the council can step in, but you're saying if it was during the course of the rest of it, so not the end of it, the council would step in, but if it was at the end, it would automatically go back to the home authority. Am I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. I also wanted just to confirm, just so that we're all clear, what I just want licensed, but what the permitted operating hours are for circuses and fun fairs, and if there are certain aspects of a fun fair or a circus that are time limited, so they have to cut off by a certain point of time or this sort of thing. Thank you.
I don't actually have that information to cover the entire borough. I believe what happens is that each site is conditioned based on its local circumstances. So when Green Spaces are making their assessment, they will decide the most appropriate start-finish times for that particular site. It may be that it's more appropriate for one to stay open later because of it's not surrounded by anything sensitive compared to something else that is in a more built-up location. So I believe the current system, they would make that local assessment based on the locality.
Councillor Farley?
So just to clarify, is there any aspects of a circus or a fun fair Is it just everything has to shut down by a certain time, or are there things like loud music have to shut down by a certain time, or is there aspects that have different thresholds, so to speak?
The short answer is no, because it's unregulated, so there are no stipulations as to the timings or anything like that.
Sorry, Chair. I'm presuming we can't let them run till 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, so that's where the hire agreement would come in and stipulate that. So there's nothing. What I'm saying is there's nothing in regulation that would stipulate a finish time. But if locally green spaces or the council decided it was an appropriate end time, it could stipulate that on the hire agreement. Yep.
Councillor Gardner.
Where do I start? What worries me about this is, first of all, I really think you've had a lot has been put on you. The green spaces should be here, but I would like you to take back from me, not the committee itself, that there's far too much reactive behaviour by they'll only do this, only do that if they've had complaints. It's a lot easier to set your stall out first. So me personally, I'd like more proactive work done with the hiring and firing, and I really wish that the green spaces were here, because this meeting would go on for a very long time if they were. Thanks.
I'll be happy to take that back, Councillor Gardner.
Good. Give them my love.
Okay, anyone else wishing to ask questions before we finish? I can see no indication. Councillor Gardner, can you switch your mic off, please? So I will just end by thanking you, Stephanie, for attending this evening. It's been very informative. And a lot of us come out of this item, I feel, that I look forward to the follow-up answers coming out of this meeting, but I think potentially there could be some merit in a mini review with recommendations coming from this committee. I do feel, reading the report, 25 grand an income for the amount of work required from the council really does need looking at. Again, I think there may be other avenues to explore, and I think that could come about by way of a review, but we'll see what the answers come back to the committee in the near future. But thank you again, Stephanie.
Thank you very much.
And you may leave if you wish to do so. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Parking Services and Contract Monitoring Report, pages 13 to 42, and a warm welcome to both Richard and Freddie this evening. Like the previous item, there will be no presentation. We will go straight into questions. So I now open it up, and we start with Councillor Smallwood, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, through you, if possible, when we do this again, I'd quite like to see ABCOA here to be held to account. They've got quite a large contract with the council. We do have others in, and through you, if possible, if we were to do a review of this nature, I think having them in here to answer some questions would be of benefit. I'm sure we're going to get a wonderful performance from our officers, but if that through you, we could look at that next time. I've got quite a few questions, and so I won't hog them all up, and I'm sure our colleagues on both sides will be asking these. But I just wanted to start with Appendix 2, the contract key performance indicator, where this seems like they have hit every target. They're the most incredible company in the world. Everything's absolutely perfect. Do we really believe that absolutely everything on the key performance indicator is green? You can probably guess what my follow-up question is going to be, but I just wondered whether we all felt that, officers felt that it was absolutely perfect, nothing was going wrong, and they deserve a special certificate of well done from us.
I shall put some context on that for you. Basically, what you have there within the report is the last month. We do this every month, and there have been months when they've been in the amber and they have been in the red, and we do address that by having our contract meetings and going through this line by line. But rather than give you reams and reams and reams of last year's performance overall, I just gave you the snapshot so we could discuss that in particular detail of the areas. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help. I think if possible in future we could try and get might be difficult for you, but an annual review as to see. I actually don't think it would have been a massive problem to have had reams and reams of it, because it would have been consistent, headed January, February, March. I'm not saying give it to us forever, but it would have been interesting to see what patterns there were in months, and that will lead me very on nicely to ask, and I apologise, Chair, it's slightly naughty of me to ask a slightly ward-related issue, although it is important, around enforcement in the summertime in and around the Lido, which is obviously a huge challenge. I'd like to understand a little bit around, although I understand it's not happening, in and around how we're going to enforce cars being taken away, because there's an awful lot. It's probably, I think, our largest towing operation of the year, given that we're not going to be having the pound, which I know is frustrating for my residents, but also around the consistency of the enforcement of these tickets. I can see an awful lot, and again, some of this data would have been interesting on a monthly basis, on a seasonal basis. How are we going to, because I often get an awful lot of complaints from residents that people are just wandering on by, or they get, maybe in the high street, they get chummy with the Uber Eats drivers, and that's slightly further away from the Lido. But how are we making sure that we're getting consistent enforcement from those that are carrying it out? Because my experience is it's been quite inconsistent.
Thank you. So, in most instances, I will defer to Freddie because he is the parking expert. In relation to the Lido, however, we recognise there are huge challenges around parking there, and we deploy a tow truck to carry out removals through the summer. But that has limitations because at times firstly, as you've reflected, we don't have a pound, so all we're doing is moving the cars that are obstructive to another location, and as much as we'd like that to not be the case, that is where we are at the moment. And in that respect, we do get the feedback that sometimes they're lifting the car up and the owners return, and they return the car back to the owners so they can drive them away, which is actually, in many cases, better for us because they still get issue of fixed penalty notice, but it means the tow truck isn't taken away from the site, and they can carry on removing cars when the problem's been solved by that car being moved. So we will continue that through the summer. There will be a tow truck deployed. There is a CEO present all the way through the summer. So they patrol the streets. We deploy extras at the weekends and bank holidays when the weather's better. So it's our highest deployment area for CEOs and remain the same, but because the volume of vehicles that come into the area inevitably will lead to problems most years. But Freddie can expand a bit further on some of the more wider problems you refer to about consistency.
Yeah, certainly the role of a CEO, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is very autonomous. They're out there on their own. We keep track of them by reviewing their body cam footage and things like that for interactions with members of the public and what have you. We can also run reports on what PCNs are issued and where they're issued. So what we tend to do is that when we meet with our contractor, we will run those reports and we will sit with the contractor and go through them. If we find that a particular CEO has not covered the area in the manner that we would like he or she to have done, we will then talk to the contractor about perhaps replacing them with somebody else that's a bit more proactive. And if there's any kind of disciplinary issue attached to it, i.e. somebody just walking around doing absolutely nothing but being paid for it, we will pick up on that as well.
Very quickly, sorry, Chair, because it's quite specific on that point, and I appreciate your leniency. Do we do any? It sounds like some sort of like rugby organisation, but do we do like there's plainclothes policemen go out and check things? Do we do like plainclothes people to go and monitor what officers are doing, especially around hotspots? And also, how do we close the gap sometimes between officers ending shifts and maybe a parking zone going on a little bit further? So obviously there's sometimes a gap between them going off quite rightly because they finish for the day, and how do we close that gap and move potentially shifts around?
What we tend to do is if someone's coming off shift, we would ask the contractor to make sure that the gap between somebody coming on and somebody coming off is as narrowed as possible. But there are unexpected things that happen, sickness, somebody doesn't turn up for whatever reason, a family problem or what have you. Where we have that gap and it's beginning to get too wide, I mean, we can accept a 20-minute gap between a shift if the reasons behind it are acceptable. If it's just a question of, we couldn't be bothered, that's not acceptable, and that's something that we will pick up, and we do pick up with the contractor regularly on our monthly meetings. I personally have meetings outside of those formal meetings with them regularly where we might have a coffee and we might have a discussion about things, to try and just keep the momentum going with them. What we don't want to happen is that they sit back and think that, okay, we'll just up the ante for the monthly meeting, when if we have these meetings outside of that, what tends to happen is they're on the ball more because they feel that we're on the ball. In terms of monitoring them, we as council officers don't have the resources to go out and walk around and look at them. We depend on the contractor to use their supervisors to go out. So the supervisors will go out and they will make real-time notes about what the CEOs are doing and things like that, and then we can collate it. We can actually pinpoint them by using a geomap, and also by their handhelds will show where they are, how long they've been, whether they've been stationary, that kind of thing. So we do have the ability to do that, and we do look at that, especially in active areas such as the Lido.
Thank you.
Councillor Gohill?
Thank you, Chair. So, when's our, just out of interest, when is our contract with APCOA up? And do we regularly look at competitors to APCOA? And if so, why do we keep sticking with APCOA? Because to me, it doesn't seem like we get much value for money with them compared to PCN levels in other boroughs that I know are very high. We've only had, 99,000?
Yes.
That's
a very good question. The existing contract began in April 2022. I arrived here in January 2022. That runs until 2027. That's a 5-year contract. I wasn't there for the tender exercise to kind of understand why they were awarded it, but I would assume that following all of that procedure and the way that that's done, that it would have been done properly and they would have come out on top in terms of, value for money and all the things that a council would want them to be responsible for. In terms of looking at others, we wouldn't necessarily look at other contractors until we were getting towards the end, because it makes no sense. And to be honest, a lot of contractors might not want to engage with us anyway, because APCOA is our contractor. I mean, I've worked for other authorities where we've worked with people like NSL, and they all operate on a very, very similar basis. Could you repeat the last part of your question in terms of the PCNs?
Yeah, it was just about value for money with PCNs compared to our neighbouring boroughs.
So, and Freddie might be able to explain further, but we've got to be very cautious when looking at PCN numbers in isolation, because there's a number of factors that go into how many PCNs are issued, one of which, the biggest one, is policy. Many of other boroughs either have more yellow box junction cameras, they have low traffic neighbourhood areas, all of which will result in more PCNs being issued. So the numbers have to be looked at in that context, as long with other factors like we've got large geography to cover. We deploy some of our CEOs every day to walk around the parking management scheme zones. It's only fair. Residents are paying for their permits there. We ought to be checking. The issue rates for CEOs going around some of those zones is very, very low, because they're large zones. They can't cover a lot of areas. There aren't many contraventions, but residents want us to check them. Similarly, the Lido, the CEOs that are there all the way through the week, through the summer, in many cases the issue rate is tiny. We deploy the same CEO to Hayes Town Centre, they would issue 10 times as many PCNs in a day. Now, so we're making policy decisions to do things that residents want, like controlled truck parking around the Lido more, but that does come at a cost of issue numbers of PCNs. So we have to moderate looking at the numbers in isolation and not just think that's down to poor performance by the contractor, because a lot of it's coming from our decisions about what we're asking them to do. And if we said to them, go out and just focus on the areas where the contraventions are the highest, they would move CEOs away from areas where residents want them, and the issue rates will go up. But we don't think residents want that. But this is what the committee this is about. Tell us if we're getting that wrong.
Councillor Gohill.
Can I request, Chair, given that you gave Councillor Smallwood a third question, can I ask it because my laptop's literally about to die? So I've got two questions, if that's okay. I'll ask them in order because I don't know when it's going to die. So just off the back of that, I've got a question around FPNs on idling cars. Why is that responsibility given to environmental teams? If there's parking officers there, surely it makes sense for them to be the ones giving the FPNs. And sorry for I don't want it to die. So, and my third question was the shift to cashless parking. I noticed that it is being implemented later this year, and I just wanted to ask what steps are being taken to support our elderly residents.
Yes, thank you. So on the first question, the offence for idling is a completely different offence. It's a criminal offence under our Public Spaces Protection Order, which means the legislation is different, the systems are different. It's not. It's a fixed penalty notice, not a penalty charge notice, which means that the civil enforcement officers are working under one set of legislation, one range of systems. Notices have to comply with certain rules and guidance, and the appeals process is different. So it's very difficult for them to dual issue. They'd have to have a separate lot of machines, a separate lot of a whole range of different training. It's much more confrontational, issuing some of the fixed notices under the Public Spaces Protection Order, because we have to obtain the name and address of the person concerned, whereas we don't with parking offences because we've got the vehicle details. So they've actually trained totally differently and equipped totally differently, the officers, and we've looked at this before, and it's very difficult to see how you could cross-train and equip officers to be able to issue both kinds of penalty notice. On the second point, sorry, remind me what the second point was.
Cashless parking.
Cashless parking. Obviously, that's something that's only recently been determined. There will if cash can't be used to pay, then there's still the pay by phone option and cards available on machines. So it's just the people can still pay direct on the machines. Just have to be a card payment rather than cash. And if there are locations where that's particularly problematic, then obviously we will be considering whether that's an appropriate step.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. The cashless parking, there's several areas about that which are problematic as well, because if you don't have necessarily debit cards or other things, so the provision should still be there. I seem to recall it did mention in the report that was still being continued, at least for now. I wanted to ask about the table on page 31 to 32 with the PCNs that have been issued for on-street and off-street parking. It would have been handy to have some sort of comparator, so prior year or something, so we could sort of determine whether this is sort of a constant on these particular types of contravention. So that may be something that for future reference we could have. But also some of these are obviously quite high. Some of them are sort of concerning in terms of things where are we sure, or is anything that happens after the fact with these high numbers that where we've got sufficient street signage informing residents and visitors that they shouldn't be parking in these zones. For example, parking in a restricted street during prescribed hours. There's 9,600 of them. Do we know that these areas they are correctly signed and people can see what they should or shouldn't be doing?
The answer to that, Councillor, is yes, and I'll explain. Whenever we set up a new control parking zone or wherever there's a restriction, we have a legal obligation as a council, as what they call as the enforcement authority, to ensure that we follow what's called the Traffic Signs, Regulations and General Directions Directive, which is a piece of statute that lays out exactly what lines and signs have to be in place and where. Now, if you look at the size of a borough, it's huge. So what would then have to happen is you get damaged ones. So if we issued a ticket and there was damage there, the CEO should take a photograph of whatever that damage is. If somebody scratched it out, if they've cut it off, whatever they've done, we would then cancel that ticket. But where we do have lines and signs that are considered legal, we will enforce the ticket. So the onus is on the driver to seek out the signs and to familiarise themselves with whatever restriction may be in place before they leave the vehicle unattended. And that's a legal obligation placed on their shoulders. Our legal obligation is to make sure that the signs are there.
Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. I realise it's on the onus is on the driver, but it's just making sure that the signage is in place. The other, pages. Touching back on cashless payments and whatnot. There are a lot of stories about issues of scams with QR codes and people sticking labels over machines, and also this thing about scammers dressed up as officers. How are we tackling that to make sure that our residents and visitors are not being scammed?
Yeah, thank you. That's a national problem. It's been well reported, and we do meet the police monthly, and it regularly comes up as an issue that we review together with the police about what we know about what's happening locally. And unfortunately, in most cases, what we've had to do is we're reliant on public communications to try and warn people of the risks. Thankfully, in the police report, haven't seen as much here in the borough as perhaps other areas, but we know it happens. It's very hard to actually prevent that happening in the first place. So we just track it as much as we can with the police, and we have done some public communications fairly regularly to warn people where we've heard of people becoming a victim in the borough.
I would just add to that we've also instructed the civil enforcement officers that when they come across these Q codes or whatever they are, to take them off, or if they can't take them off, to permanently mark them off and then report it to us, and we keep a record of that. We also work with comms, so whenever there's a spike in it, because these things tend to just level off and then they start again. And when that happens is we tend to liaise with comms a lot, and we put things on the website, and London councils pick up on it, and it goes across all the London boroughs. But as Richard said, it's a very difficult thing to actually wipe out.
Councillor Kaur?
Thank you, Chair. But as you said, just following up on what Councillor Farley said, do we have any data on how many scamming CEO incidents have we recorded in our borough, and what happened after that? Do we have any numbers? Because
I don't think we do. Some will be not reported, some will be reported to the police. I think if it's reported to us, as you refer to, I don't know if we don't have a central record of it. I don't think it's an easy thing across the different organisations that get the reports. I don't think there is a central record, to be honest. I can take that away and have a look at it, but I think I can't see where we've actually got one single place I could point to the data and tell you how many there has been over a period of time or where they've been. Are you aware of anything?
I think it's difficult, as Richard said, for the simple reason that you might have Mr. Smith that might report it to the police, and you might have Mr. Jones who doesn't. You know, the police don't actually have a live feed to us, and vice versa. We don't have that interaction where we say to them, "Can you tell us how many?" Again, as Richard said, I'm sure we can approach them to see if we can get that information, because I think it might be useful to give us some idea of the level of you know, these scams that are happening.
Councillor Kaur?
yeah, because my understanding from your previous response was that you were working with police on that, and then if you're working with them, a data would be useful. In terms of how adaptive and responsive is this enforcement service to geographic and emergency needs, because there have been incidents around schools where traffic and congestion and non-enforcement is a regular issue, and those are the hot spots which haven't been seriously dealt with. So how adaptive or responsive are you to that, and why have those issues, like in specifically, say if it was in my ward, like in near Wooden Green Lane, there was many incidents where they needed enforcement officers and they were not there. So what happens in those circumstances? Are we learning lessons?
Are you referring to the parking hotline, when somebody comes across an instance of contravention or higher traffic levels, that they contact the contractor and the contractor goes out, or are you talking about regular beats? We are actually reviewing the beats at the moment. The reason why we're doing that is that what tends to happen is a range of beats are put in place and they're regularly patrolled. What we have found is happening is that people are becoming accustomed to the CEO being around at certain times. So what we're now doing, we're working on trying to come up with a more agile way of doing this, where instead of spending so long in one particular area where the level of compliance is lower because people have been ticketed and driver behaviour has been changed, we can now focus on other areas. But it's an awful lot of information that we're pulling out from the system, and we're sitting down and working through to refresh all of this. So in answer to your question, we will be looking at areas where there is a spike or where there is more activity that we can actually, I won't use the word target, we can focus upon.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. Where do I start? I just wanted to get some clarity on the point that was raised earlier. Are we saying that we ask ABCOA to audit themselves? We rely on their supervisors to audit their own officers? Is that what I got?
No, not quite. The supervisors go out and make sure that the CEOs are doing what they should. We from the back office can use the GEO mapping system to see exactly what people are doing, and we'll sit down with them and we'll run reports. Each CEO has a unique identifier, as does every supervisor, and that is only applicable to that particular person, and we can see exactly where they were at any one time. And when we sit down in our meetings, we will go through that, and if there are any sort of I wouldn't say gaps, it's the wrong word, but if there's inactivity for a prolonged period of time, if you're standing at a vehicle, obviously it will show you that they're standing still. If then after 5 or 10 minutes and it says 11:32 hours or whatever it is, and then they move on, when we run the report to what they've issued, if they've issued a PCN at 11:33 or 11:32, we know they've done something within that period where they haven't been active. So we can say, okay, fine, there's no point in looking at that, because that is the evidence that we would use from the back office system, because it's live fed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Chairman, if I can have the follow-up. That to me is still quite concerning. To say there was some form of incident or something like that, we're relying on a member of public to report if there was an incident with the officer. I'm just concerned that we've got a contract that we're not spot checking. So I come from a business where we use contracts all the time, but in my portfolio I would still pop in and spot check. I wouldn't always rely on the information that I'm given, because in my eyes, that if there was something quite controversial, there is a potential for it to be swept away and us not ever know about it. If we've got a contract in place and we're never checking up on it, that's my concern. I know we have the data, we have the geo trackers, but that's only one small part of the business that we could see. So I'm just wondering why our officers are not going out in the field and talking to our CEOs and asking them the questions, because there could be potential for them, the CEOs, to raise an issue that ABCOA senior management may not have actually told us.
When you say, can I just clarify, Councillor, please? When you say incident...
Yeah, I've used that as an example. Let's say, I don't know, the supervisor is abusing or swearing or at the CEO. We're not going to know that because we're not talking to the CEOs firsthand, so we're not getting frontline information. I found from this committee myself, visiting the frontline operations, we get a better insight talking to the boots on the ground than we actually do from the officers, because the boots on the ground are getting the problems. So I'm just concerned that we're not getting the full picture, as in yourself and us, because we're not talking to the frontline staff. We're relying on second-hand information. If that's clear.
Yes. In terms of trying to monitor them in a live environment, we would have to physically go around and do that. Now, we don't have, if you look at our structure, we don't have the resources to do that. A lot of London boroughs have what they call contract monitoring officers. So you'll have a contract manager who will manage the contract overall. the strategy, the meetings, all the rest of it, and then you have the contract monitoring officers whose job it is to go out. We don't have that. We have a relatively small team by comparison to a lot of other London boroughs. So, yes, it would be great if we had that, but then again, that comes at another cost.
Just if I may add as well, and I appreciate it's not quite the same as going out and talking to the CEOs and getting their perspectives, but we do regularly review the body-worn footage if there is an incident. So if there's a report to us of a CEO about alleged misconduct, or a CEO suffers some abuse, we can watch the body-worn video. I know Freddie's team do that regularly, so that gives us a different perspective of seeing something that's happened, but it is retrospective when there's been an incident, rather than us proactively saying we want to monitor. As Freddie says, we don't routinely do that proactively.
Sorry, Chairman, very quickly.
We get into a very bad habit this evening of follow-ups on follow-ups.
Sorry.
Just to mention, the Conservative side have had 3 so far, so I'm going to allow the Labour Party side to have their fair share as well. It's only fair. So
I just wanted to know if the footage was available upon request or it's always available. That was it. Sorry, Chairman.
That's fine.
The footage is always available, and we can request it through. We actually have a link to their server that we can just. All we have to do is tell them that we're looking.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. 2 things. One is a question on blue badges. Why can't you display the actual picture on the front, so that you know the person who's parking? Do you follow what I'm saying? Normally you've got the normal thing, but on the back you've actually got the photograph. Because a lot of times when we're doing our ward surgeries, we know there are people parking there to go into the gyms, things like that, and it's not their parking things. I mean, we have tried to ask them, excuse me, are you actually a legitimate disabled person? But we just get abused, basically. But I can't work out why the photograph can't actually be on the front.
It's a good question. There isn't any requirement for the person that owns the badge to display it in that manner. There isn't anything that demands that of them. So as long as the badge is displayed, as far as the law is concerned, that's fine. However, CEOs do have the ability to inspect or to request to inspect a badge. Mm-hmm. We've carried out 1 or 2 initiatives with the counter-fraud team, where we have gone out and we have found people misusing the badge, and the counter-fraud team would take that matter forward. Whether it's down to prosecution or whether it's down to a warning, I think it would depend on the severity. We've found everything from people saying that, I've gone to get my mum's medication, I thought I could use it. Well, no, you can't. Unfortunately, your mum has to be there too, because she's the badge holder. So in answer to your question, there isn't a requirement to have it face up. I'm not sure if by doing so there'd be some kind of, I don't know, and I'm thinking out loud, some kind of GDPR a restriction on that perhaps.
Okay. The other question was actually page 41 on the parking dispensations. I might have missed it completely, but where it says statutory 63%, okay, what does that actually mean? Because I thought statutory would be like technically the other, and does the other include where people get dispensation maybe for 2 or 3 hours to park up for a funeral, the hearse to turn up, or for wedding cars?
Oh, I see. Yes. Statutory things. It's things like roadworks, utilities, gasworks, that kind of thing.
Freddie, could you use your mic, please?
Apologies.
Yeah, because you've got building works and roadworks on there.
Yeah, roadworks is slightly different to statutory, from what I understand. I think statutory is more to do with utilities and underground things like that, like the gas and pipes and all that type of thing. And I think that's what that refers to.
We can clarify.
But we can certainly clarify exactly what it means. I can see the confusion where it does say roadworks, and then it goes on to say building works, and it goes on to say statutory. Now, the utility companies do fall under what we call a statutory organisation. They have quite a bit of power, and if we didn't give them the right to do that, they could just close the road.
Yeah.
So rather than close the road, we'll say, yeah, here you are, here's your dispensation, off you go. It's the lesser of two evils.
And
But
the thing about other, does that, when it just says large deliveries and you've got other, does that cover things where people get dispensation for a hearse turning up at somebody's house?
Yes, it would be, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing.
Yes.
And faith buildings for marriages and whatever.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Cheers.
But I will come back and clarify exactly what the statutory meaning of it and what umbrella that falls over.
Thank you.
Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. Isn't nobody on the other side?
They have indicated, but not in that
I'm
order.
conscious I've already spoken, so...
If you could ask your question, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about a little bit about the money side of this. Obviously, we would have had targets when we brought in the £75 first parking permit, which obviously is lower than other London boroughs. Do we know whether the targets, that the expected income that we set for those has matched what we were hoping to get? Is my first question on money. And if you don't off the top of your head, you could always write to the committee or come back to us.
Yeah, I think, and I doubt Freddie knows either. I don't off the top of my head because it's before I joined the council, so I will need to go back and look at what was expected in terms of income and what was actually realised.
Can we set that as an action, and maybe Dan Kennedy could write to the committee as probably his responsibility. My second question is around obviously the fantastic and something that residents praise around parking is the Hillingdon First card. Do we know the usage and the percentage of the Hillingdon First card in the borough? Because I think it is something that I think residents recognise as is something they're quite proud of, that's quite special, you know, that they get that differential parking rate. Do we know what the level of usage is in terms of percentage of residents that use it?
Not off the top of my head, but we can certainly get that information quite easily, I should think. So if you'd like, we can pull that together and pass it back to the committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to confirm, we have all of that data by car park, by parking area. There's a lot of the data and it varies in different areas, but we could pull some sort of summary together which gives an indication. But I'm afraid we don't have it here to hand.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to touch upon the safety of the CEOs. It used to be the case, having been out with them previously in my former ward, that they were in pairs, at least. I believe that's not the case anymore, that they now go out singularly. It has been spoken about, I think you mentioned it, Freddie, that there's issues of abuse and things that they get. It's more to do with how reliable you can take the body worn cameras and the aspects of their own safety when they're just going out doing their own job, but you know, they can be on the receiving end of some quite vile abuse and attempted assault and assault as well. I'm just conscious that on the occasion I was out with them, one of the body worn cameras failed. It ran out of power. It was just fortunate that his fellow officer managed to capture it on his body worn. So I'm just curious and conscious about the fact that there's a reliance on these devices that can fail, and you know, how do we sort of make sure that the officers are kept safe from abuse as much as possible?
Well, you're quite right. It is one of those jobs, regrettably, that does attract a lot of abuse. We do get daily reports of everything from verbal abuse to, assault. Every CEO is trained in conflict management, and they train very well, actually. ABCOA and the likes of the private contractors do train their CEOs very well in that. You're quite right, equipment can fail. I haven't come across that yet here for an incident in the last 3 years since I've been here. They also have mobile phones, so it would be highly unlikely that that would fail as well as the body cam. There is a protocol that is in place called Code Yellow and Code Red. So all they have to do is to get on the mobile and call a code yellow, which is this may turn into something, and the nearest CEO will join them. If they call a code red, the police are called and the nearest CEO goes there too. If there isn't a CEO that's near, there'll be one that will be on a bike, a moped type thing, and they'll go out there too. What I've found is that they haven't historically reported the level of abuse to the police at all. They've taken it as part and parcel of their job, which isn't right, you know. As you quite rightly say, they're doing a job, they should be allowed to do that freely without hindrance. We have since sat down with the contractor and we've insisted that every single code red is reported to the police. And the reason we do that is that the police won't take any action unless they can see a pattern or a trend or they have the information there. It's all well and good saying, oh, you know, this guy said this or he did this or he did that, but it's not been logged anywhere, it's not been registered anywhere. So we are making improvements in that, but if I'm honest with you, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where the level of respect that say a policeman might get as compared to a CEO, I don't think we'll ever get to that point. We do side-by-side initiatives with a police officer and a CEO, we've done that, to try and give members of the public a view to see that they're working together, that it's not just this chap on his own who in their eyes has no authority. There's actually another guy there who has a lot of authority as a police officer who's there to accompany them. Again, it's down to resources. How often the police can do that with us is quite difficult to pull together, but you know, everything like that we will continue trying and putting in place to try and make it as safe as possible for them.
Your follow-up, Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. It's good to know that's being worked on. The other thing I wanted to ask about and get some more detail on is CCTV enforcement. This predominantly appears to be relating to moving traffic, so things going through box junctions or down the wrong way of a one-way street. Is it limited to just this, or is it being explored to be used in other scenarios other than what we've got here?
The Department for Transport handed down those particular contraventions, yellow box junctions, bad right turns, things like that, years ago to local authorities. There's still an awful lot more that have not been handed down, but there is talk about handing them down because the police resources are, you know, focused elsewhere. As and when that comes through, that will probably come through the London Council's tech body, and then it will be rolled out again. But what they tend to do is to look at tranches, so they'll let maybe 3 or 4 new ones come through. There's nothing on the horizons yet, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me if we were allowed to do more. But the ones that we do have are the ones that they've allowed us to do.
Just to clarify, so what we're saying is this is we're doing the maximum we can with the CCTV. Okay, thank you.
In terms of contraventions, not necessarily locations, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Councillor Kaur?
Thank you, Chair. One, I wanted to understand, are there any out-of-hour provisions? Because they work from 7:30 a.m. until 7 p.m. as per the report. The core team works around that time, I understand. What are the out-of-hour provisions? Or if there are contraventions outside of these hours, then who's responsible for that?
That would depend on the contravention. I mean, our contractors work during those hours and outside of those hours, unless there is like a special event or something else going on. We wouldn't necessarily have, CEOs out on the beat at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, or you know, that kind of time. If we're looking at things like obstruction, and we're looking at things like antisocial parking and things like that, parking across pavements and all the rest of it outside of hours, that would become a police matter. So if, say for example, I don't know, there was a car that blocked a driveway, that person would have to call the police, because the police have the powers to actually do something about it. All we can do is issue a parking ticket. There's nothing we can do with the vehicle itself at the moment. Councillor Cool.
Thank you, Chair. And I see that there is a vacancy for Head of Parking Services. Any idea when it's likely to be fulfilled, or are you comfortable without it? So do you actually need him, or her, or whoever that place would be? Thank you.
It was a her who left back in, beginning of August. And since then, as the council's been going through various reviews around, driven mainly by the need to reorganise to make sure it's efficient and reduce costs as far as possible, that post has been held open. What I would say is Freddie and one of his colleagues, Jazz, who runs the operations side, have been doing a fantastic job helping me cover that post. It limits a bit of our capability to develop and improve, but the team keeps things like the enforcement contract monitoring going very, very effectively, and we're still progressing some development projects with an additional bit of capacity reporting as a projects officer to help us develop a parking strategy and review some other aspects of operations.
Councillor Gardner.
Hi, first of all, can you thank Jazz on my behalf? He gets lots and lots of emails from me. She, sorry. What is the staff turnover like? And the reason I ask is, you probably know I represent Hayes Town Ward, and some of the racism that your officers get is absolutely disgusting. But I have got quite a big mouth, is apparently well known. Thank you for that. Okay. I do tend to I will be quite rude to the person that's making the racist remarks, and your officers just shrug it off. And I don't know, I struggle with it a little bit, because racism, unless I'm very much mistaken, is a hate crime, and I just wonder why they have to put up with it. And that's why I asked in terms of staff turnovers, because there must be, after you've been called certain names over and over again, you must have gone, not you personally, must have, and left. So can you help on that?
Yes, I should try. I think it comes back to what Councillor Farley was touching upon earlier. I think they become not immune to it, they become hardened to it. If you're exposed to something on a regular basis, you shrug it off as part of the job. I'm not interested, it doesn't bother me. Now, that's a coping mechanism. It doesn't make the attack, or the verbal attack, right. But that CEO then has to report that. If they choose not to, it's very difficult, because they're there, it's happened, someone's used some racist remark, they've just shrugged it off and walked on. Now, that's a very difficult thing to capture. Now, that's not just a Hillingdon thing, that would be across the whole of England in terms of CEOs, wherever. If you look back over the years, there were different areas that CEOs came from. There was from West Africa. There was a period when there was quite a lot of CEOs from West Africa, then Eastern Europeans, Indians, and so on and so on. So it's something that's always been there. I think it's something that's always going to be there. But until CEOs decide to take the matter further, to report them, it's very, very difficult, because, I certainly don't agree with the fact that they just shrug it off. I don't. I would like to see them actually report that. There's nothing that I can do to make them report it, but we can actually sit down and say, look, just how you report a physical code red, this might not be on the same level the way that you're thinking or the way you've experienced it, but please still do report it. But it's difficult. Councillor God?
Could you, I don't know, I spend my life telling people that they don't have to put up with things. Can you perhaps, from us, I'm sure everybody here agrees that they don't have to put up with it. I mean, even if they just casually mention it, but just so that you know that it's happening to them. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. Thank you.
Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points, and I'll do them separately because they are different. Penalty charge notice branding. My understanding, a vote was taken, I believe, at London Councils recently, where we attempted to put us and many other, both Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat authorities from Band B to Band A. I understand that that was voted down by, ironically, the Central London boroughs who are in Band A, to stop the ones from the outer London going into Band B, which seemed slightly strange. And my understanding is the reason behind that that was given is that the consultation that the councils of all different political stripes did weren't strong enough. So I just wondered whether there was going to be any progress in those councils getting together to redo those consultations and look if we can get into Band A. I've been very careful not to make a party political point, because the irony is that it was some Labour councils voting for and some voting against, and the irony was it's the ones who wanted to go in it voting for and the ones who were already in it trying to stop them going in. So I just wondered whether we had any thoughts about how we could strengthen our consultation, working in consultation with councils across the outer ring.
Thank you. So two things happened in parallel. One was our application to move from Band B to Band A. The second was the London Council's application to increase the fined rates across the piece. And they were running exactly in parallel. So what ended up happening was that the GLA put forward to the Mayor the request, which the Mayor approved and has been publicised now, to increase the fine levels across the whole of London. And that impacts a lot on our application to go from Band B to Band A, because effectively a lot of our application is based on the fact that the fine amount was not a sufficient deterrent, and we were still seeing high levels of contravention. Therefore, we needed to move to Band A to increase the deterrent against contravening. Well, the Pan-London change is now going to move up the fine levels even higher than it would have done, which does undermine our consultation, because of course we consulted publicly about a change that was based on moving from Band B to Band A at a certain level, and now actually those levels are completely changed. So it's a question for Councillor Lavery to decide now whether he wishes us to push for Band A, move to Band A still, or whether we will see what impact the overall increase has and then revisit the question again, because it may achieve the desired outcome, which is a change in driver behaviour and lower levels of contravention without needing to move to Band A now.
Small.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a really helpful answer, because my understanding there maybe wasn't, I'm not a technical expert on charging banding notices enough. That's been incredibly helpful, so thank you for correcting my slight misunderstanding and that. I just wanted to understand a little bit around hotspot times of when our CEOs may end for the day at a particular time, but I'm especially thinking in the summer months, and I won't name places, but in areas where people may want to spend time in the summer months later into the evening, you may find that CEOs knock off and residents recognise that they're knocking off at a particular time, and then into the evening, especially when someone might have had a drink, when they might have been in the sun all day, confrontation with neighbours, antisocial behaviour and other things increase. But obviously people's parking and maybe going along in the evening, they know they're not going to get caught, so they park across drives, they park on double yellow lines, they do all sorts of things. Do we ever extend the time that officers, the TOs are out, not just away from particular events, but based on the time of year and the uptake that we may see in particular parts of the borough?
We haven't, but if there was sufficient evidence or a groundswell of, or the wish to do it, there's no reason why we couldn't do them in terms of initiatives every so often. Whether or not we could do it permanently, it might need a slight change or a slight upgrade to the contract. But certainly it's something that we could look at wherever there is a problem.
Thank you. If I can just ask a question on the engine idling, the responsibility for the FPNs is to the environmental team. It's separate from the parking service team. Is there any way that could be brought in if we chose to do so? Is it clearly set in stone we can't? It just seems that there's an awful lot more resources of traffic wardens walking out and about, especially around schools, that if they were to see it by chance, they could issue the ticket for engine idling. It'd be quite useful.
Thank you. And as I explained earlier, we have looked at that. It is problematic because of the different systems that the officers would need, the different training they have to have. They get paid different rates as well because of the nature of the environmental enforcement officers' role is more confrontational. So we might find that would then significantly impact the cost of our parking contract, because understandably those CEOs would start to question why they're not getting paid the same as the environmental enforcement officers. So there are lots of potential implications from doing that, which makes it quite a high threshold to get over if we wanted to realise the benefits that you rightly describe of having officers able to issue both types of fines rather than just one.
No, that's fine, thank you. It's just a clarity, so it's not an actual legal restriction. No. It is our choice because of obviously procurement issues. Yes, what I would say though is there are some quite clear legal rules around the civil enforcement officers, their attire and how they present themselves, so which doesn't apply for the environmental enforcement officers. So we would have to then adhere still to the rules about how the parking of civil enforcement officers, parking wardens, look and how they present themselves, rather than just merging it completely. So just to be clear, there are some legal controls. Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chair. I just want, coming to your previous point that you've asked the contractors to ensure that every code red is reported. When did you have this conversation with them, and since then have you had a sight of the data now in terms of how many code reds have been reported?
Yes, that data is always discussed at our monthly meetings. They collate it all for us. There's a brief description of when, what was said and what happened, whether it was reported, where it was reported, all that type of thing. And we keep on top of that, as I say, every month we look at that. If there's anything particularly serious, I mean, we're part of APCO's sort of network, if you like, for when anything like this happens. There's a back office system they use where all of this information goes into, and then it pings out an email to certain people. I'm one of them, Jazz is another, and we can see immediately the level of damage that may have been done to a CEO, and then if that's the case, we immediately will get together. If it's just what we call a run-of-the-mill thing that we can add to the stats, we will. We'll make sure that the right authority, the police, whoever is aware of it. We'll make the team aware of it. We'll make sure that everybody's aware that this particular street or road or wherever this happened, you need to be extra careful. You need to keep your eyes peeled, and if there's the slightest hint of anything, you need to withdraw from there. Yeah. So we do monitor it very closely. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, in terms of the car parks where they have received more PAC awards, have there been any incidents of code red? There's a list of park mark awards for the car parks. Has there been any incidents of code red?
Off the top of my head, I would say no. I can't recall an incident of a code red in a car park, and that's probably because the multi-stories have like CCTV and things like that. But if you want, I can drill down into that database and have a look and come back and just let you know whether there was or there wasn't. But I don't think there was.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. So over the past few years we've seen that the council is moving towards a technology base, hence why pay-by-mobiles come in. How effective has the implementation of that been? So bringing the service in, what's the uptake been? How has residents reacted to it?
So So I've got some data on that I could share, but we were recently looking, and the uptake has been pretty successful. We expected a steady increase, and what we have seen is there's still obviously a lot of transactions at the machines, but we've seen something in the region of 40% of transactions. It varies across different car parks. Are paid by phone now, which is in line with what we expected, and has been generally well received. But as I say, there is some variation. I can provide a more accurate account if needed. Just, Chair, if I may, not to say for now, but I have found the data that was requested earlier on the use of the Hillingdon First card, so I can come back to you on that at a suitable time to save following up later.
Councillor Davis?
Just to stick with the pay by mobile, how many complaints have you had about the system? Because I've come across to this myself. We don't seem to allow for human error. So when you enter in your registration, or if you've got a number of cars on the app and you select the wrong vehicle for any reason, and we make a mistake, we seem to have a bit of a zero tolerance on that. Look, we don't accept that someone has made a genuine mistake. With my personal case, I actually selected the wrong vehicle, but I'd paid for the parking. I could prove I'd paid for parking in the area, but I'd selected the wrong registration on the app, and I was told, it's your fault, you made the mistake, go away, sort of thing. And I respect I made the error, but do we not account for human error? That's my question.
It's a good question. We look at every case individually upon its merits. If, for example, somebody put in a 0 instead of an O, we would cancel that, because that clearly we can see that's an error. The problem that we have, I'm not calling into question what you're saying, but the problem that we have is that somebody says they've got 3 or 4 cars on there, and they say, oh, I made an error. They can't prove they made the error, and we can't prove they made the error, so we just have to hold that line there. If they can give us something extra to help us, because the service is very heavily audited, so when the auditors come in and they look at cancellations, they will look for evidence as to why this case was cancelled. So unless we can have something tangible to scan onto that case when we cancel it, we hold that line of enforcement, because it might seem unfair, but the onus is on the person, on the driver, to ensure, just as they do with lines and signs, they have to go and find them and read them and familiarise themselves with it. Again, they have to make sure that they key in the right details, use the right vehicle at the right location. There are certain things we can look at in the back office that can help us. If there is nothing there that can help us, as I said, we will enforce the ticket, because the onus is on you to ensure that you've actually done the right thing. As I say, personally I recognise that can be a little bit hard to swallow, but when you're dealing with cases where you have to make a judgment on whether you enforce it or whether you cancel it, it has to be done on an evidential basis.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Gohill?
Thanks. Just off the back of what Councillor Davies said, I was wondering if there's a way to make the parking pay by phone parking specifically. I know it's not entirely related to this topic, but if we can make it a bit easier for residents, I'm thinking particularly car parks and high streets. I'll give you 2 examples. One, the Pavilions car park in Uxbridge. For every level of the car park you park on, there's a different code. And then there's a 4th code which apparently covers everything, but you're not entirely sure. Very confusing. Then another example is Ruislip High Street, where if you park on one side of the high street, there's one code. If you park on the opposite side, which is, less distance than the distance between me and councillors on the opposite side, there's another code. And it's a bit difficult to know which one's which. So it might be, and especially when you're on a high street or something, and you're paying pay by phone, you don't go to the machine. You don't always want to walk to the machine because you got it on your phone. is it something you can say, like, for example, on high streets in particular, or the car park, you can say level 1, level 2, level 3, or on a high street you can say outside Clinton Cards or outside McDonald's or something of that sort, just to make it a bit easier so people know what side of the road they parked on, or what floor?
I mean, it's certainly something on the face of it that we could look at. I don't see why not. I know that every single location has a unique number. Yes, you're right. If there is a piece of high street on one side and a piece on the other, why they're different, perhaps we could look at that.
Yeah.
You know, if it's sort of 200 metres up the road, well then maybe that's justifiable in having a different code, because we need to differentiate between the different locations. But certainly if they're close, there's no reason why we can't review that, and I'll be happy to do that and report back at some stage in the future.
If I could just add a clarification in that, just if we can add the element of specifying the location as well, so it doesn't, I suppose it doesn't matter if there's a different code as long as people know. So, you know, that's why I specified maybe outside a particular shop, so you can, when you're in your car, you can see that shop's right there and I've parked right here. Or if you see the other option and it says a shop that's on the opposite side of the street, you know that's not the option for you. Maybe if that can be taken into account as well, and that would also help the instance if there's long roads as well, because you roughly know where you're parking. You'd know, you know, one thing, M&S is up there, and you know, Civic Centre's up there if you're parking along here. So you know not to pick the Civic Centre one if you're out near M&S, for example.
We could have a look at that. I'm just thinking out loud. If we said this location is 80819 and it's outside McDonald's, but there are 10 bays there, and we issue a parking ticket for whatever reason, if we end up at adjudication before the judge, would they then, comes back to this lines and signs thing in terms of what the legislation expects from us in terms of being specific, would they then turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, how does Mr. Smith know, or how does he know where he says outside McDonald's, how far outside McDonald's is that? Is it dead outside? Is it in Bay 3? Is it in Bay 4? Does it cover, you know? So we can look at it, but there may be some restrictions legally or certainly procedurally in terms of if a case went to adjudication, whether or not the adjudicator would be critical of the council. But yes, we can look. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I will be wrapping it up shortly, but if we can keep the questions and the answers a bit more briefer, we can get through more questions. So, Councillor Davis.
Thank you. My question's on the audit. So I understand you've said you're heavily audited when it comes to rejecting tickets, etc. I've had a case where a resident was issued a ticket. Sorry, I know it's ward work, but it's the only example I've got. A resident was issued a ticket by mistake. He'd actually parked on his own land, but he had to provide a copy of his title deed document for the ticket to be rejected. So how far into that are we going for residents to have to prove that they own something when it's quite clear that they were ticketed wrong?
It's the Traffic Management Act, which is what we are obliged to adhere to, is quite inflexible. And what I mean by that is that it places, once the ticket's issued, whether it's issued correctly or not, the onus switches to that person, or the recipient, and ultimately the registered keeper of the vehicle. And what it says is that they have to prove to us that that ticket should not have been issued. It's not for us to issue a ticket and for us to then prove we shouldn't have issued it. It's for them. Now, in an ideal world, we wouldn't even issue that ticket because they would be well aware of the demarcation between the private land and the public highway. However, there are some instances where that demarcation isn't clear. There are some instances that I've come across where there is disagreement about who owns it. And you can go back to, you know, where there was a handshake 50 years ago over the fact that you can have this. You know, there's all sorts of odd little things that if we start getting into, we'll never get to the bottom of and deal with the case. So that's why the onus is placed on that person to provide whatever they can to us. If they provide that and we recognise that we've made an error that we should have known about, well, of course, we'll apologise. If it's an error that has been made genuinely that we didn't know about, we'll deal with the case just in the normal way.
Perfect.
Yeah. Councillor Davis?
And my second question is, we've got the AMPR van that's gone out. How effective is that van? Because from my understanding, it drives down the road, say, of permit holders. It will then pick up every vehicle registration. It will then ping up on an in-cab technology to say there's 4 vehicles that are parked there without permits, and then the CEOs have to get out and then issue the tickets. Is that the correct way? And if so, how effective has it been? Because it seems a great piece of technology that we have, and how far can we push that?
So we trialled an AMPR car. We haven't actually got one.
Right.
But we're evaluating currently with Councillor Lavery whether the investment, because they're expensive, is justified and appropriate, and the kind of factor you've just referred to is one of the elements to it. The data shows they cover a lot of ground far more efficiently than a CEO on foot, but for most offences, for the reasons Freddie explained, the CEO still has to get out and issue the ticket. For some, like parking at a bus stop or parking in school clear zones, we can issue tickets with the camera-based evidence, so that makes a big difference. So that's what we're balancing up, is the gain from the efficiencies and the speed of movement against the cost of the vehicle, and hope to make a decision soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back to what Councillor Gohill was talking about, because I'm somewhat perplexed about what this right up High Street situation. Personally, I use cash myself for the machines. I've never used apps or the contactless business. Why would an area, if it's just a high street, why would they not all have the same number? That seems mad to me. I mean, and the example that Councillor used was, if you're on one side of the road and the machine's there, it's not working, you walk across the road because that's the nearest one to you, and that's got a different. That's really, really bizarre. What's the justification for that? I don't understand it.
I think when they first introduced it, I think they left it by and large by using GIS maps and stuff like that. I think it could do with a review, as we've agreed, and it's something that I will certainly be looking at, because where it's cut and dried, i.e. a high street, and that's it, well, providing there's sufficient bays throughout that high street, you can have one number. We would have to look at things like time limits. Is there a time limit there? Is there a time limit on this bay of, say, I don't know, 2 hours, and a time limit there of, what if there's differences, we might have to have different numbers. But if there's no differences in terms of the bay, I don't see a reason why we can't.
Take your time, you go.
Sorry. But how different is that then if you're just using cash? Because you're still paying whatever the fee is in the machine, as opposed to using another form of payment. So I'm still not sure why. You're just paying whatever it is that's required. I don't get it. Sorry.
So I guess the point is, the code is the way that the system records where you've got permission to park. If you pay by cash and you get a ticket and you display your ticket, then the CEO will read the ticket to judge whether you've paid for that session or not. When you pay by phone, it's done on a system, so they have to look it up, and therefore they need to know the location that you've paid to park in to know that's legitimate. I think that maybe not explaining very well, but that's the fundamental difference. And as Freddie then says, if it's exactly the same rate, there's no logical reason why there would be a different code. But if there are different rates, then it has to have a different code, because that's how the system knows what to charge you.
Okay, sorry, I'm just using an example of my own experience with this, but when you get a ticket out of the machine, it has the car park name or whatever it is on it. So what again, that's the area you're in. That's the high street you're on, that's the whatever.
I see what you mean. So you buy the ticket from the machine on the other side of the road, and yes, that's a valid question. And probably without looking at the locations, it's quite hard to answer, and it might be worth us looking at some of those locations and seeing whether a change could be made or there's a legitimate reason for it. Because to be honest, it's the first time it's been raised with me as an issue. But if it's an issue, we need to look at it.
Thank you. I do need to bring this time to a close, so I've got Councillor Kaur, Councillor Davis, Councillor Gohill. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a further question? You don't? Okay, right. Councillor Kaur and Councillor Davis. Is there anyone else before I close it after that? Because it's locked after that. Right. Councillor Kaur.
What percentage of PCN collection goes to the debtors? Like how many people do not pay PCN straight away? Do we have the percentage, say, which has to go through debt collection?
We do have the data. It's a huge amount of data. We can try to pull something together for you if you can tell us what it is exactly you want. And the reason I say that is that we're dealing with people's decision making. Again, I'll use Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones. Mr. Smith gets his parking ticket, he pays it immediately. The council has the money, the case is closed, no right of appeal, and that's gone away. Mr. Jones, on the other hand, decides, I'm not going to entertain this at all. Why should I? I disagree with it. I'm not even going to appeal it. I'll just leave it. 18 months later, Mr. Jones might have a bailiff knock on his door because the court has issued a warrant for that debt. During that period, that £55 parking ticket has now become a lot more money. The bailiff would add their fees and so on and so on. So we have all of that information, but it depends on what it is you're trying to get at. If you could tell us, we will then pull it out from that information and then we can submit it to the committee.
Well, generally, out of curiosity, what percentage of people pay straight away, and if there is a certain percentage, say 20% of the total contraventions go through debt collections? Just generally. Okay,
so as a percentage, let me see if I can't tell you how many people pay immediately. That will take a few days' work. But I might be able to tell you. Let's have a look. I can tell you roughly how many would go to debt recovery.
There's only about 6 million transactions. We'll come back to you in a minute.
I think a written answer outside the meeting would suffice, bearing in mind the time restrictions. So if we could move on to the next question from Councillor Davis.
I will let you know.
Mine is very similar to that, but I want to know what the split is between ABCOA and London Borough of Hillingdon. How much revenue, how does it work? Is it a 60-40 split? Do we just pay for a contract? How much money do we have to give ABCOA, and how much money do we get? Is it like, if it's a £25 ticket, do we get £15 and they get 10? How does it work?
No, it's a contract which requires them to, as the diagram shows with all the KPIs, to deploy CEOs for a set number of hours a week effectively, and then we monitor against. We don't monitor against PCN numbers. That's that's not the driver. It's not about how many PCNs you issue. It's about compliance. All of the PCNs they issue come to us, so we pay them a fee to deploy the officers. The revenue that comes from the fines comes to us to offset that, and the surplus goes into, it's quite limited, but it covers things like concessionary travel fares. It's in the report what the surplus goes to.
Thank you.
Could I add to that? Under the legislation, it's illegal to operate any kind of parking operation in terms of generating income. It's about non-compliance and compliance. However, if it does generate a surplus, that's fine. If we had a situation where we did a deal with the contractor, where we said, for every PCN you issued, you take £15, we'll take the rest, that leaves us very exposed, because what is the contractor going to do? They're going to issue a lot of tickets, and some of them may not be quality tickets. They might not be for the right reasons. So again, we have to be very careful in the type of contract that we have. And in this case, they have nothing to do with any income from a PCN at all.
Okay, we'll bring it to a close then. I did raise a question outside the meeting with Liz. I'll mention it here in the public forum, is that the 4.5 million expenditure, I think it'd be good to see a line-by-line breakdown of that cost. It wasn't very clear in the report. And the other one I had was, when I've had previous reports on enforcement, we also had data on how many vehicles were moved on, as opposed to getting tickets. I couldn't see that in the report. If we could have some data on that as well, unless I've missed it.
We can provide it. What I would say is it's very low numbers, because we only do the move on with the tow truck at the Lido during the summer, so it's about 80 odd in a year. We don't do it routinely through the year. That's interesting.
I've seen previous ones where they're probably a lot higher in my ward alone, but I'll wait to see what the data comes back with. Okay. Finishing as well, in answer to Councillor Smallwood's point earlier about not having the contractor here, again, I just mentioned that we do actually have a site visit on Monday with the contractors, so we will be scrutinising their level work in depth. And again, this isn't a review, this is an information item, so if the committee feels that we need to dig into this a bit more deeper after Monday's visit, in addition to this, then we have the full powers as a committee to do any review we see fit. So with that said, thank you both to Freddie and Richard for your time this evening. You've been very valuable in the answers you've given, and I appreciate there's a lot of questions that have been asked this evening, and that's the whole reason we don't do presentations these days, because it allows full scrutiny from members. So thank you again for your attendance. We move on to our next item. You're free to go if you wish to do so. The next item is the forward plan, pages 43 to 52. Thank you. And item 8 is our work programme, pages 53 to 56. Councillor Farley and Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering whether or not we can add to the work programme an area on allotments and the condition of them borough-wide and the status of them. I'm curious because I couldn't see that allotments are specifically spelled out that come under this committee in case they've been moved elsewhere, but since Green Spaces is under us, I assume that allotments still sit under this committee.
Yes, I believe we've had allotments previously, but it was many years ago now, I think. It was probably under a different name of the committee, I think, but we have looked at it previously. It might be worth looking at it again. I think there's room in the work programme to do it. Yep. Councillor Smallwood?
Chair, it would not have escaped any councillors notice that Heathrow have announced today an expansion programme for them, and obviously the threat of a third runway is now firmly back on the agenda. 52 of the 53 councillors on this council, I believe, oppose expansion. Definitely 2 of our 3 MPs, in John McDonnell, to be fair play to him, and David Simmons, oppose it. We proudly, as a council, work together to stop.
Excuse me, isn't this...
No, I'm not political. I'm praising John McDonnell, who's definitely not on the same team as me. I am keen, on a cross-party basis, to make sure that we continue to hold Heathrow to account, but also make sure that we are, under the No Third Way coalition, providing good scrutiny, which they have done in a very fair cross-party way. I'd like to see them come to us as many opportunities as possible, an early opportunity to explain especially the first part of this expansion programme they're talking about, which doesn't involve a runway. It involves the expansion of the airport and trying to increase capacity, I think, at Terminal 2 and Terminal 5. Do we think it'd be good to get the senior members from Heathrow to come in here and do that? So I'm hoping that members obviously didn't see that as a political point at all. I think we work very fairly cross-party on this issue, and we'll continue to do so.
For clarity, Councillor Ward, are you asking for an information item or a review?
I think we should ask Heathrow to come in and give us some information, especially on this first part of the programme, which I think they're going to try and press ahead with at relative pace. I don't think we're going to have a third runway in the next couple of weeks, but I do think there's part of this, there's a first part that they have announced that I think would be interesting to come and get some real clarity on that and hold them to account on that.
Thank you. Councillor Fry, do you wish to talk on this point? Or?
I did, thank you. I did Heathrow expansions listed in the work programme.
Yes.
June and July, I think.
Yeah.
So whether that's the intent is for what Councillor is talking about is there, or it was something extra. I wasn't sure that was the case.
I think it's sooner. I think the dial has changed slightly today with the announcement of their multi-million pound investment. So I'd like to see them come in potentially slightly sooner. Apologies, and thank you, Councillor Farley, for pointing that out. That's a fair point.
So happy to propose that we just move the current scheduled one forward if we can to an earlier date on Heathrow. So we can look at the work programme and move that round. Yeah.
Sure.
Anything else? Councillor Cole?
Just as a comment, as long as it was a question, it was not party political, but when we start mentioning councillors and all, I think it does tread that line. So if we could just keep to the questions, that would have been fine. If that's your opinion, sir. Thank you.
It's not. I think Councillor Smallwood's was well intended. The question was non-political. That's my view. So, with that said, thank you for your attendance, and I close the meeting at 9 o'clock. Thank you.